Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about a very important issue here at Enough is Enough, and that's the issue of addiction and how addiction impacts so many aspects of our lives. We know that in particular, as we here at EIE continue to fight online exploitation and threats that exist online, we know that addiction plays a big part in what's fueling this exploitation, sexual violence, sex trafficking within our culture today. Hi, my name is Bill Woolf, and I am a team member here at Enough is Enough. Enough is Enough has been fighting against the threats online since 1994. Enough is Enough's mission is to make the internet safer for children and families. And we do that through a variety of different programs, educational programs like you're viewing today, where we can educate the public and other professionals about what the threats are online and how to safeguard our children and our families. But we also have programs targeting faith communities, and we are very active within the policy space, helping our policymakers, our elected officials understand what those threats are and enact policies to create change. And I'm so thankful to be joined by two incredible experts that also happen to be a lovely couple, Mary Lou and George Swanberg. So thank you both for being here with me today and sharing your expertise with folks at home to be able to really understand this issue of addiction. And George Swanberg is founder and president of Lifeline Addiction Foundation. He does outpatient treatment on addiction, psychotherapy practice, and is also an expert in the area of brain science and brain imaging. And so really thankful to have you here with us today, George. Mary Lou, his beautiful wife, is also works at Lifeline Counseling, and it is through that work that she became involved in mental health issues, betrayal trauma, and specifically human trafficking. Mary Lou is a board member of Anti-Trafficking International and is a strong advocate for prevention in these different issues that impact human trafficking and sexual exploitation. So thank you both again for being here with us today and sharing your very valuable time. George, I wanted to start with you. I know that you've been working in the addiction space for quite some time now, doing a lot with substance abuse addiction. But I wonder if you could lay some groundwork for those that are watching this program to understand, what does it mean when we say somebody is addicted to something? What does that look like? How does somebody become addicted to a substance or pornography or anything?
There are many people who will, obviously be involved. Most people have to eat, but that's not an eating disorder necessarily. Many adults will have sexual relations, but it's not necessarily an addiction. The alcohol is the same way, that if you have one or two drinks, who cares? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when the addiction kicks in. A lot of times it has something to do with the physiology of the brain or the person or their loneliness or something like that. And the thing of it is, with an addiction, if people go back and back and back to it, it does become a dependency and addiction. Now, with alcohol and cocaine, for instance, and heroin, nobody really needs those things to survive. The problem with trying to nail down sexual addiction and eating addiction is that some of those things is really good, are really good. And so when does it become out of control? Well, take a look at the compulsion aspect, and people try to overcome these dependencies, these addictions, by simply, cutting back a little bit, and almost every month, certainly almost every week, there's somebody who comes in because his wife or a family member has, demanded that they go get help. So the person comes in. Mostly the ones that I've been dealing with are men, not because we set out to do that, just that's who's coming through the door. But they do the eye rolling thing because the family is very upset by what's going on, and an intervention, which is what that's called, has to be able to have power. It has to be able to give or take something that's really important to that person in order to have any power. Because we've got one right now that you know came to one meeting, and surprisingly, that didn't do much. And typically, a lot of times in these interventions, the person will say, "Okay, I'll go to one AA meeting. Don't bother." Because that's not going to do it. That's not going to give your kids back to you. That's not going to fix your marriage. It's not going to solve the financial problems that grew out of this. And typically, these addictions go in pairs or four or five. The person who is sexually addicted is not necessarily the only thing that they're addicted to. Sometimes they will use cocaine, and there'll be a gambler as well. And so the family finances are blowing out the window.
So, George, it sounds like, as you talk about this, it's really interesting because I think you raise a very valid point that we need to be mindful of, and that is that when somebody becomes addicted to something, the impact is across a large spectrum, right? It impacts, not just that specific line in their life, but it impacts so many different things, right? So you're talking about gambling addiction now is impacting the family finances, and we're talking about relational impact and all these other things. And so I wanted to break that down a little bit, right? But I wanted to go back first. You talked about addiction as being almost this driving force in their life to whether it's to consume food or alcohol or drugs or other things, right? This that really just drives in an unnatural way. Could you talk, and I know it gets a little bit into the science of it, but could you talk a little bit about what happens, right? What is there a switch that gets flipped, or is there a rewiring in the brain? What's causing that insatiable drive to consume the substance or to consume whatever it is that they're addicted to?
A lot of times we call it a dopamine dump. And that can happen with kids who are down in the downstairs of the house and they're on video games. And if there's no way for that person, that child, to come away from that, if they're sitting up there having dinner with the family, but their mind is on, uh, you know, what's the Call of Duty or whatever they're playing, and the dangerous part of that is that they're on a headphone talking to their friend 100 miles away as well, and that's where the predators come in because they know how to. They've got little machines that can imitate a young person's voice, and they know the keywords and things like that. And they're out there to try to get kids more addicted. But there is that little dopamine dump, and that's active whether it's a video game or whether it's cocaine. Cocaine is a direct connection to it, or sexual acting out. Alcohol, to a certain extent, will do the same thing.
Oftentimes we hear people described as adrenaline junkies. That they want to go out and they want to feel that rush. Would that be an accurate sort of parallel to what you're talking about here?
Yeah, I think so. That chemically, adrenaline and dopamine are closely related, and both of them feel very good when you're involved in it. But the problem is you develop a tolerance to the old amount of dopamine or adrenaline. So people keep pushing the envelope. They keep going after greater and greater highs, and they'll go from looking at maybe a Sears catalog in the old days, and then they'll move up to Playboy or something like that, which has more explicit images. And eventually, a lot of times that leads into acting out, but these things have to be kept secret because there's somebody at home who cares if you're doing or not doing this. So these things are all very well hidden, and it can lead to one-night stands and multiple partners and things like that. And of course, that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. One, it's destroying the relationship, but they can also bring diseases home, so to the spouse. So that's a bad thing.
If I may, I think you're bringing up a very good point. So we've talked about addiction in the context of substance abuse, and now talking about the sexual addiction component. And so, Mary Lou, I'd like to go to you. I know you're an expert in this area, actually a co-author of 2 books. One, Why Can't He Just Stop? A Women's Guide to Betrayal, Trauma, Sexual Addiction, and Infidelity, as well as Recovery from Sexual Addiction, The Path to Sexual Sobriety. And so in your experience, as we've heard George talk about how addiction happens, right? And it's this chemical dopamine release. Could you talk a little bit about pornography in particular? I know George started to touch on it, but here at Enough is Enough, we have been fighting against the uncontrolled proliferation of not just child sexual abuse material, which is pornographic images and videos displaying children and abuse of children, but also just the obscene, or what we might call the hardcore content that is available most of the time for free, but certainly very available on the internet. Could you talk a little bit about how that progression happens? How does somebody go from, as George was mentioning, a Sears catalog or a Playboy magazine to some of the more graphic or child sexual abuse type material? How do that progression happen?
Well, first of all, we live in a world that is pornified. Our whole culture reeks of this everywhere. There are probably even members of the family that are already using it if they're children, and they pick up on that right away if, dad or somebody is doing this. But also the media, it's coming into the schools, it's on the newspaper, it's everywhere. But a lot of times a child will not look for it. Many times they might even find it while doing homework. Mm-hmm. So organized crime basically runs the pornography, the sex trafficking, the sexual, addiction, the whole thing. And one leads to the other. And usually pornography becomes the gateway drug because it's the first time somebody's paying for sex. So the leap from pornography to trafficking or to sexual addiction is very easy. So, for instance, a child may come from either a very strict family where nobody talks about sex, and he hears a word, and it could be women too, so boys and girls. So I'm just going to use male because it's easier and it's more prevalent. He might hear a word in the playground, and he feels that he can't have this talk with his parents because they've never had the talk. So there isn't an opening already where he feels safe to discuss something like that or ask that question because he is afraid he's going to horrify his parents. So he'll go to the internet and look up the words. And then he'll probably end up on a porn site because the porn people now know the way you addict a child is when they're curious about things to set up porn sites all over the place so they'll catch them one way or another. So many times the child is not really looking for it. So they might be doing homework and need to, they're not sure how to spell a word. And the many of the people that are involved with designing the porn sites are addiction specialists, because this is a big industry. It's over $100 billion industry. So what they do is they will buy up all of these URLs of common misspellings for children. So a child will say, I don't remember received. Is it an I before E or an E before I? Go on there, and I'm not saying that one is one of them, but that is one way. And so the other thing is they can come from a family that has no boundaries, and then they're looking for a structure. But a lot of times they'll get their education from their peers, especially if a peer knows that this child is innocent and doesn't know anything about it. It might be just a fun game they play, just all of a sudden all of them get their magazines or show them all the URLs and do a dump. And the dump is what is the killer. It becomes a catalytic event or an adverse childhood experience, and that could overload the brain, because a child's brain is not developed until they're about 27 years old. So they get this dump, and then they get that rush, and they've already experienced what that feels like, so they'll try to duplicate that high. And the high of pornography is similar to crack cocaine once you get moving. So it is highly addictive.
That reminds me. So some of you may know that I did over 15 years in law enforcement. And I remember a case that I worked when I was on the child exploitation unit. And it was, we had a report of child sexual abuse material, that there was illicit images being moved through a device in a home. And so we went to investigate the situation and found that it was a 13-year-old. 13-year-old boy, and he was exchanging images and looking up pornography of other 13-year-olds, which, okay, that makes a little bit of sense, right? So it's age, looking at images of his age group, but still highly illegal. And I remember interviewing this young man, and I asked him, I said, how did we get to this point that you are, exchanging so many images? There was lots of images that were going back and forth. And he said, well, I was watching a video on YouTube innocently. It was a prank video. And in the video, he saw somebody pull down another person's pants as a prank. Now, I remember as a child, we called it pantsing. You'd run around and pull somebody's pants down. But he said the image that he saw of a naked rear end intrigued him. And that image was a hook. And he wanted to, it created a level of curiosity like you're describing, Mary Lou. And I think that's so important. It's one of the things that we focus on here at Enough is Enough, is trying to equip parents with the tools and resources that they need. And so I'd encourage folks to check out our website, www.enough.org, and also www.internetsafety101.org. And these websites have what we call our rules and tools. And they give certain prompts for parents to have conversations with their kids. I'm a father of 6 children. I've had to have that conversation. It's not fun, but it's incredibly necessary because, Mary Lou, as you pointed out, if they hear about it somewhere else other than from their parents, which is a trusted resource, they're going to go to the internet. They're going to start searching keywords that are going to lead them down a very, very difficult path. And you brought up a very good point. And that is that the brains are not fully developed into their 20s. Some estimates are now 27, as you pointed out. I wonder if you could speak a little bit. I know you touched on it. You mentioned the word adverse childhood experiences. I wonder if you could touch a little bit more on that in particular, that when a young developing brain, we know the average age that a child in the United States is first exposed to pornography now is 9 years old, which is just shocking, incredibly shocking. But I wonder if you could talk about what does that do to the brain when they're exposed to those type of images at such a young age during those developmental phases?
Well, there's actually tests for adverse childhood events called the ACE test, and they list several different factors of things that will make you much more vulnerable to be exploited. One is if you come, I don't remember all exactly, but there'd be things like, has there been a divorce in your family? Has someone gone to prison? Is there drug use in your family? Did you have to leave your country of origin and go to some other country? So these are highly traumatic events, and they stack up like pancakes. So trauma is unusual, and it's not just you have one trauma and it goes away. They start packing on top of each other. And that, like when you get into women's betrayal trauma, and she finds out that after being married 30 years or so, she didn't know that her husband was having affairs all of those years or has had a porn addiction. Well, then all of those peels of the onion just develop more and more. And for when she gets into therapy, she's going to have to pull all of those back. But it goes down into those very early attachment types of things you have and the adverse reactions.
Yeah, I think it's so incredibly important to understand that the impact of addiction, whether it's substance abuse addiction or in particular as we're focusing on because of our mission here at Enough is Enough, and that is a pornography addiction, that this is not something that, and George, you mentioned this earlier, it's not something we can just stop or reverse course from. And it has such an impact across the board. Now, Mary Lou, you started talking about betrayal trauma. And
If I could say something,
yeah, please.
Bill. I think you pointed out something very important, and that's preparing parents. There is no law that says that parents have to be mature in these areas. So kids come in and they say, "Mom, I want to talk about this, that, or the other, about sex." And the reaction is many times, just don't. That's not helpful because there are details to this thing that kids need to know because they're being educated at school and online by people who are don't have their best interest in mind.
So we were talking about the fact that just the impact that it has, and Mary Lou, you were mentioning betrayal trauma. We know one of the very serious impacts of a pornography addiction is relational. I wonder if you could expound upon that a little bit. So if somebody has a pornography addiction, if they're exposed early on in life, particularly as a child, an adolescent, how likely is it that they will struggle with relationships later on? And could you expound upon a little bit, why does that cause tension in the relationship? What are the issues at hand when somebody has a pornography addiction, and why does that prevent them from having a healthy, connected relationship to their partner?
When a child starts developing this habit, he starts more and more withdrawing from society. He will be choosing things that will feed his habit. He will go towards sexualizing everything around him. That will have much more interest to him than being present with his family, his relationships. He'll want to excuse himself from the dinner table very quickly or not even have dinner with the family at all because he's thinking of the computer and what he may be doing on the computer. So he's always going to be escaping from family events. And when you develop new habits and you keep doing them over and over again, they become so entrenched. They take over other skills and talents you may have. So if a child was very good at baseball, if he was very good with machinery, if he's not using those skills, he will be developing other ones like how to be dexterous on the computer and how to do the clicks and all of that. He will his whole brain will be changing, and he will not be available. He will not value friendships. He will isolate more. His behavior will change. His mood will change. He'll become more depressed, have higher anxiety. He will drop his other friends, and he will become more and more isolated and narcissistic. And he will lose compassion, love, and respect for everyone around, because the computer trains him to develop disrespect for human beings, to see them as objects and not as complete and complex people who have special gifts and are individual and are loving. And he will not even seek that kind of love. He has a false love that's coming into his life that will surpass genuine love. So his whole identity and his self-image will change over time.
Well, I think that's so incredibly important for people to understand, right? Is as that addiction takes hold of their life, I think the biggest takeaway from what you just said is they lose the ability to have compassion. And I think that's when individuals move from, and this is somewhat an opinion, but I'd love for you all to weigh in if you agree, that when they start to lose compassion, they move from simply having an addiction that's impacting their lives to more predatory behavior. And this is when they become predators. This is when we start to see the move into facilitating things like sex trafficking. This is when they move from not just being viewers and consumers of illicit content, but now being producers or wanting to engage in that content, or engage in those activities, I should say. Would you agree with that? Is that kind of where we could see that crossover into predatory behavior?
Absolutely. It's very easy to go because it becomes a disease and it gets progressively worse, and you need to keep reaching new highs to get the same dopamine dump or better, that you will go from watching to touching. That's another form of escalation. And then touching, then you will get into more of the illegal activities, and it just keeps getting worse. And even when you're doing the porn on the websites, you will go into genres that you never thought you would get into. And child porn is one of them, and I don't even want to go into some of the others, but they're so horrific. So you're right with that, Bill.
And so I think it's interesting because, in the history of, psychology and understanding what's happening in the brain, a lot of times we have to trust the experts, and that's great. We trust the scientists, we trust the professionals. But now with the advancement of science, we can actually see some of these things. I know there is new brain imaging and brain spotting that is going on. And George, I know you've been using this in your practice and have been studying it for some time. Could you explain to us what exactly is this brain spotting or brain imaging? What is it, and what does it allow us to see?
Well, this is different than the imaging. And the brain spotting is actually an approach to dealing with trauma. And there was an older version of this called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And there was a woman named Dr. Francine Shapiro who developed this. She was having a struggle with somebody in her life, and she went for a run and realized when she came back that she had resolved that conflict, and then looked back at what she was doing, and she had been moving her eyes back and forth during the run. Well, that imitates REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And we know that that's one of the ways that people work through issues. They work through things by, when you're dreaming, you have a number of disparate things that happen during the day. Not all of them are going to fit into the long-term view of your life, but some of them will. So that's how that happens, because the eyes are part of the brain. Well, there was a guy named Dr. David Grand up in Manhattan who was using that and training that, and then he realized that when he would have people look back and forth. There would be a point in their visual field where they would startle, they would respond. So he learned to hold his pointer right there, and things that people didn't even know about, that because that position in the eye correlates with the place in the brain where the trauma is stored. And these days, I mean, the trauma can be sexual molestation as a child and things like that. Many times, if these things happen pre-verbal, before the children even had a knowledge of how to explain it, it resolves just by doing that exercise and having them go back non-verbally into that sense. Because when you have trauma, the left prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain, shuts down. Well, that leaves the creative, intuitive, imaginative brain running crazy. And so that's where a lot of the trauma comes with PTSD. I started working with people coming back from Vietnam in about 1971, 72. And we back then, all we knew to do was have people report what happened. And about a third of them got better, but the rest of them either got worse or stayed the same. And so we've been trying to overcome that, trying to figure out that. But when you're in the office and somebody is doing the brain spotting, now they are relaxed. That left prefrontal cortex is able to inform the right brain, hey, this didn't happen today. This is something that happened 10 years ago, so you don't need to be reacting to that today. And it gives them a chance to make a decision about that. And I've had a number of people, men are notably non-communicative about a lot of things, especially feelings and things like that, whereas girls will sit down and chat away, but the guys don't do that a lot of times. So the brain spotting works really well with those people, and they will work through things that they didn't even know were there. And in one or two sessions, they'll say, I think I'm good. Well, what happened? What did you remember? I didn't remember anything, but it just went away because we were able to have a calm situation where they were able to access that somehow. We want to get their brain into what's called the subcortical level of functioning at that point. But if they're sitting there chattering away and I'm talking with them, it never gets that low. It stays up here in the more immediate parts of the brain. You don't want that. So it's been amazing to see how people resolve things. And we get back together next week or something like that. Do you want to do this again? No, I think I'm good. It's magical. But anything that can do that is really good and quick. But so much of what's happening with, as you well know, with the trafficking and things like that, that children are being abducted. They're being groomed, many times in school, to be a setup for predators. And so this is where parents must step up. I was talking with someone that I've known for a long time about this person lives in an area where they have a lot of people from countries that just use trafficking as a normal kind of a thing. So I was trying to tell him about safeguarding the kids, and he said, well, that's your thing, not mine. Because they don't want to get into the deep end of the pool on understanding these things. So that's the first thing that has to happen, that the leadership in the family has to step up.
Bill, if I may add, about the brain spotting, another fabulous quality about it is it doesn't re-traumatize the person. They don't have to tell the story. They don't have to have all the flashbacks and everything else. It's a very gentle way of allowing the brain to heal itself. without trauma.
That's fantastic, because we know it's always a challenge. Even during my time as a law enforcement officer, it was always a very difficult balancing act, because if you were going to hold the offenders accountable and go to trial, you knew there would be some level of re-victimization from the survivor of that crime having to retell their story. And so we know uh, how the long lasting impact that trauma has on individuals and their lives. And so it's great that science is advancing in a way that we can help these individuals heal and become better. I wanted to, as we close out our time, I wanted to really hammer home something that we've hit on just in pieces throughout this segment, and that is prevention and intervention. Right? What do we do to stop it from happening in the first place? Or how do we support those that may have been impacted by sexual addiction? And so I wonder if, we've talked about parents being critical to this. And Mary Lou, from your perspective, I wonder if you could just really share with us a little bit more about why is it so important for parents to engage early on with their kids? And if you could talk about what are some other things that parents can be doing to safeguard their children?
Well, I think the most important thing is to create a safe place in the home, to bring up the topic earlier. And some children are getting hurt very early, even in preschool. Mm-hmm. So it's to teach some of the basics, the way you think will most help your own child. It has to be individualized. But always keep your voice very low and say, you can tell mommy and daddy anything. We will not punish you. Create that space where you, and also to ask them how their days go. What's going on in school? Who are your friends? Always have involvement in their lives. Don't let them just go off and feel that they have to handle their own lives themselves, Or are you concerned about any of your friends in school? And bring the kids over to your home where they play after school, and not leave the children, especially unattended, after school. And obviously bring the devices out of the bedrooms. Georgia knows a lot more about some of this stuff. Make sure the computer in the house is in a public place, that there are monitors on it, that they have filters.
There's software that will help parents. For instance, mirroring software. That you can get a router that has the ability to do mirroring software. Most iPhones for the last 10 years have come with that capability. It's just that people don't use it. And so if parents can wade into this area themselves and start acclimating their own minds to the information, they're going to be giving less shocked kinds of responses when the kids need information. But the video games are a very tempting babysitter for the parents, because they go downstairs, they're on a big screen TV, they're gaming with somebody, they say it's their cousin somewhere that they're talking to. You don't know what it is. And in that time, those hours, they are out of the parents' hair. And so the parents get the freedom to go ahead and do a lot of other things. But raising kids is not about keeping them out of your hair. It's, I don't have any left, but it's hard work. So developing situations where parents can get a break, they do need a break, but that means finding other parents with similar values that will help out and be a mutual kind of a thing. I had a girl who was in that situation, and a very pretty young woman from the Fairfax area, and she disclosed to me, like I think on session 2, that she had been spending every night sleeping with her boyfriend all through high school, because she told her mother, I'm going to go over for a sleepover with Shelly tonight. Okay. No checking, no knowing those parents or anything like that. And it wasn't true. And I sometimes tell parents that we have a rule at our counseling center that we try not to discharge more people than we admitted. They and one of the girls did get pregnant because parents weren't looking at that. Go ahead.
I think another thing, Bill, is a lot of parents are afraid of the technology. Have your child teach you the technology. Ask him to show you the game. If he has an avatar, why did he pick that avatar? Mm-hmm. And then have moral conversations. Well, if you find the avatar is killing everybody, you just say, well, is that going to enhance your life? Find ways to do teaching and engagement, and you learn at the same time all about that. So another person said the person in charge of the house, a tech person told me this, is whoever knows how to use the Wi-Fi and where the switch in the house is.
That's true.
So, and that's usually a 12 or a 13-year-old. Another thing is, and you hate to think this, but when you have young children, make sure you teach them accurate names for the body parts. If they ever have to go to court, they need to be able to identify correctly what something is.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I love that you've all brought up the issue of online gaming, because to this point we've talked about a lot about pornography and sexual addiction, right? But just kind of coming full circle, in the beginning, George, you were talking about that dopamine fix, right? And we know that with online gaming, that is also a way to cause that dopamine release, right? And then it just causes that desire for more and more and more. Here at Enough is Enough, we focus on addressing the threats of online gaming, whether it's from predators that are trying to communicate with our kids, as you have so rightly pointed out, or just the impact of that screen time and that drive and that dopamine release. So, I hope that those that are viewing this will check out some of those rules and tools that we have here at Enough is Enough for online gaming. And I think the points that you all have made are so credibly important. It's about having those conversations. They're difficult conversations that we need to have with our children, but it really will keep them safe. The last question that I have is one that hopefully will give us some hope as we move forward in this very, very dark issue. And so, George and Mary Lou, I know you've been working with persons that have addictions for many, many years. Is there hope? Can somebody that has an addiction, can they successfully get over that addiction and live a full, productive life?
Yes. But it takes work, and it takes attending the meetings, because it's a whole new universe of knowledge that they're having to incorporate in their lives. And the next thing that happens is that family members stay very suspicious. Is it for real this time? And I have a couple of folks in treatment right now who go to AA meetings and sometimes Sex Anonymous, Sexual Addicts Anonymous meetings, and they're in a meeting almost every day, 1 hour. But the price of not doing that is so huge for people that eventually the realization comes home, and they realize, I don't want to lose everything I've worked for. So I've got to work to maintain it. But the other big deal after that is that parents and family members who don't believe that there's been a change, because those people have been traumatized by this too. And so they need to get to some people, some help. It's called codependency, but it's really a control dependency, and they have this idea that if I can just control him enough, if I can just control her enough, then they will behave. Doesn't work like that. It's got to be an inside job.
But it's really about creating a community of support, is it not? I mean, that's where family and other folks come in, and it is creating that community of support. And I think the foundation of having a community of support is knowledge and understanding, which you all have imparted on us today, and so thankful for that. Mary Lou, I want to give you the last words. Do you have a message of hope for us, just with your experience in sexual addiction and all the darkness out there in the world?
Well, especially with sexual addiction, you're never cured. You always have to recommit to having a high level life of integrity. And the other thing is to manage expectations. Treatment doesn't just fix you in a year or two. A lot of times it's a lifelong process, or it very intensely between like 3 and 7 years is the time. And usually, like in a couple relationship, because I do more of the women's betrayal trauma, the woman, it'll take her a little while to get, but she might have a different journey than he does. But there's some parents that really want to stay together, and sometimes it won't work. Sometimes you can't stay together because somebody won't admit he has a problem. And so there are a lot of tough questions that a woman has to address. But there is a lot of hope. There's a lot of resources out there now. Just learn everything you can, read all the books you can, and get specialized counselors if you need the help, and going to the groups. And I think you can't do this well without God. I mean, a lot of people don't want to address that, but God is our source of love, our healing, our mercy, our forgiveness. And for especially women who become addicts, and men too, there is something called second chastity. You can start all over again. We have a loving God who will let us start all over again.
So I think that, it is so important to understand that addiction impacts every aspect of our life, right? To include the spiritual aspect. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us today. Well, George and Mary Lou, it's been a pleasure having a conversation with you again. Really appreciate you giving us your time as experts in the field, sharing your experiences treating substance abuse addiction, sexual addiction, having worked in the human trafficking space as well. You both are true advocates for change and really understanding that knowledge is power. And with more knowledge, we can protect our children, we can protect our communities and our families from these unbelievable threats online that have just incredible amounts of damage. So thank you again so much. Thank you for all of you that have been viewing this program. We hope that you've been able to learn from it and grow and build a base knowledge. And again, we invite you to check out our website, www.enough.org, and all the resources online to be able to support those activities online, to keep you, your families, your children safe on the internet. Thank you.